He built a life where every second counted, every deal closed, every emotion buried, until one ordinary afternoon, two little boys with a torn teddy bear stopped him in his tracks. What started as a detour became the moment that unraveled everything he thought he knew about success, love, and the family he never knew he had. Evan Harper didn't believe in stopping. Not for red lights, not for birthdays, not for sleep. His world ran on deadlines, back-to-back meetings, and the silent hum of his phone buzzing against his wrist every 5 minutes. He had built his empire on efficiency and precision, cutting through deals like a surgeon, quick, clean, and emotionally removed. On that particular afternoon, he was running late to a critical investor dinner, the kind that came with cameras and champagne flutes and the illusion of warmth behind tailored suits. His driver took a shortcut through a quieter street, and Evan, glued to his phone, barely looked up until the car slowed. "Everything okay?" he asked, eyes still locked on a contract draft. The driver hesitated. "There are 2 kids, sir. On the curb. One of them's crying." Evan sighed and was about to dismiss it when something told him to look. Just a glance. And that glance stopped him. 2 little boys sat near a cracked sidewalk, no adults in sight. One of them was hugging a torn teddy bear, his face red and wet with tears. The other boy had his arm around him, eyes narrowed not in fear, but fierce protection. Evan stared. He didn't know why, but he opened the car door without thinking. He walked toward them, his shadow stretching across the pavement in the golden light of late afternoon. "Hey," he said softly, crouching down. "Are you okay?" The boy with the dry face spoke. "He tore bear. On accident. Now he's sad." Evan blinked. "Bear?" The sobbing twin turned the toy toward him. It was an old plush bear, seam split down the middle, one button eye missing. Its stuffing peeked through like a wound. Evan felt something twist inside him. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not pity. Something deeper. Recognition, maybe. "Is bear yours?" he asked. Both boys nodded. Evan glanced back at his car, at the open door and the flashing phone on the seat. Then he looked back at them. "What's your name?" "I'm Lucas," said the dry-eyed one. "He's Liam." Lucas and Liam, Evan repeated slowly. The names sank into him. He paused, then said, "How about we go get bear fixed?" Liam sniffed and looked up. "Really?" Evan nodded. "Really. My car's right there." Lucas hesitated. "We're not supposed to go with strangers." Evan smiled a little. "That's smart. I'm Evan. I'm not scary, just really, really late all the time." Lucas gave him a skeptical once-over, then looked at Liam. Liam nodded. Evan took them to a toy store 2 blocks away. It wasn't planned. It wasn't on his calendar. But he walked through the aisles with 2 5-year-old boys who bickered over whether bear would prefer a new bow tie or a bandage. In the end, they chose a new bear, but Liam wouldn't let go of the old one. Evan paid for both. "Where do you live?" he asked once they were outside. "Right there," Lucas said, pointing toward a row of modest homes across the street. He walked them to the door, carrying the new bear and helping Liam hold on to the old one. Lucas rang the bell. The door opened. And Evan's entire world flipped. Because standing there, in a faded sweater and shock in her eyes, was Olivia Bennett. She looked older, maybe thinner, but still her. Still the woman he'd walked away from 6 years ago because he believed timing mattered more than love. She stared at him. "Evan?" His voice caught before he could answer. She looked down at the boys, then back up at him. He suddenly couldn't breathe. Because in Lucas and Liam's eyes, in the shape of their noses and the angle of their jaws, he saw himself. And for the first time in years, Evan Harper was completely, utterly unprepared. Olivia didn't move. She stood frozen in the doorway, one hand gripping the edge of the frame, the other resting lightly on the side of her hip as if she needed something to ground her. Her eyes flicked between Evan and the two boys at his side, trying to make sense of the scene in front of her. Evan didn't speak. He couldn't. His mouth was dry, his thoughts a blur. He hadn't seen her in years, not since the night she walked out of his penthouse without raising her voice, without slamming the door, just a quiet and final goodbye that he told himself not to chase. Now she was standing inches from him, and two small children, children who looked so much like him it made his chest ache, were between them. Lucas was the first to break the silence. "Mommy, this is Evan." He helped fix Bear. His voice was casual, as if the weight of the moment didn't belong to him. Olivia's gaze dropped to the stuffed toy clutched in Liam's arms, now partially restuffed and tied together with ribbon from the toy store. Her eyes welled up briefly before she blinked it away. "Come in," she said, stepping back. The boys ran inside without hesitation, leaving the door open behind them. Evan followed slowly, as though each step inside her house peeled back another layer of the man he used to be. The interior was modest, warm, lived in. There were children's books on the couch, toy trucks in the hallway, and crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator. It wasn't fancy, but it was full of life, something his own home had never been. She offered him a seat, but he remained standing. She didn't push. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table, folding her hands as if preparing for a conversation she had rehearsed in her mind many times but hoped would never happen. "You didn't know," she said, not accusing, not soft, just stating it plainly. "No," Evan said, his voice finally finding its way back to him. "I didn't." He looked around again, at the signs of their life, of everything that had grown in his absence. "They're mine, aren't they?" Olivia looked away for a second. "Yes." She didn't elaborate, didn't justify, didn't apologize. "After I left, I found out I was pregnant. I thought about telling you, more than once. But I remembered who you were back then. What your world looked like." He swallowed. "You thought I wouldn't want them. I knew you wouldn't know what to do with them," she said. "You were always chasing something. I didn't want to hand you two children and hope you would choose them over $1 billion deal. You didn't even give me a chance," he said, not bitter, but stunned. "I gave you 6 years of silence," she replied. "You never came looking. Not even once." He had no defense. She was right. He had buried that part of his life, convinced himself she was just a missed opportunity, not a forever one. "What are they like?" he asked quietly. Olivia softened. "Lucas is bold. Always talking, always leading. Liam is gentler. Quiet, but sharp. They're both curious and kind. They're everything." Evan nodded slowly. "They're incredible." There was a pause between them. Not tense. Just full. "I didn't keep them from you out of spite," she said. "I kept them safe. I kept them small, and happy, and whole. I did what I thought was right." He sat down, finally, and looked her in the eye. "Do they know who I am?" She hesitated. "No. They just met a man today who helped with a toy. That's all they need right now." Evan nodded again, more slowly this time. He didn't know what to feel. Guilt and awe and disbelief twisted together. "What do you want from me?" he asked, but there was no edge in the question. Olivia looked tired. "I don't want anything. I don't need your money. I've built this life for them, and it works. But if you're going to be around, you have to mean it. You don't get to come and go." He met her gaze. "I don't want to go. I just don't know how to stay." Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture eased. "Then you can start by coming back tomorrow." He stood up, walked to the door, then turned around. "I'll be here at 9. This time, Olivia didn't nod or smile. She just watched him go, and when the door closed behind him, she exhaled the breath she didn't realize she'd been holding for 6 years. Evan arrived the next morning 10 minutes early. He parked 2 houses down and sat in the car for a full minute before getting out. He wasn't sure why he was nervous. He had walked into multi-million-dollar meetings with less hesitation, but standing on Olivia's porch with his hands in his pockets, he felt something unfamiliar creeping under his skin. He rang the doorbell once and heard footsteps inside. When the door opened, it wasn't Olivia who greeted him. It was Lucas, still in his pajamas, holding a cereal bowl in one hand and a plastic dinosaur in the other. "You said 9, Lucas said, squinting at him like a tiny manager checking attendance. Evan smiled. "I know. I was early." Lucas nodded once, satisfied. "Come in. We're eating breakfast." He turned and walked away without waiting for an answer. Evan stepped inside and closed the door behind him, still adjusting to how quickly he'd gone from stranger to tolerated presence. The smell of toast and maple syrup filled the air. Liam sat at the kitchen table with his chin resting on one hand, staring into a bowl of cereal, half awake and blinking slowly. Olivia stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with a casual ease that made the whole place feel like a world far removed from Evan's. She glanced over her shoulder when she heard him come in and gave him a slight nod. No smile, no words, just acknowledgement. He offered to help, awkwardly, but she waved him toward the coffee pot instead. "If you want to be useful, pour yourself a cup and survive their morning energy." Evan poured coffee and sat across from Liam, who studied him for a second, then pushed a small toy truck across the table without a word. Evan picked it up and examined it like it was fragile glass. "Cool truck," he said, and Liam gave a tiny smile before going back to his cereal. Over the next 20 minutes, Evan helped clean syrup off the table, put away dishes, and watched Lucas give an overly dramatic retelling of how Bear was almost beyond repair but saved by the power of teamwork. Olivia didn't interfere. She let the boys speak, corrected them gently, and let Evan fumble through figuring out where the forks went. It was the most domestic thing he had done in a decade, and it felt strange, almost dreamlike. And yet, not unpleasant. When the boys went to the living room to build a fort out of blankets and couch cushions, Evan stayed behind to help Olivia finish tidying up. The silence between them wasn't tense, it was cautious. Like neither of them knew what version of themselves they were supposed to be now. "I didn't expect you to come back," Olivia said finally, wiping crumbs into her palm and brushing them into the sink. "I didn't expect to want to," Evan admitted, watching her carefully. "But I did. I still do." She rinsed her hands and turned to him. "You're not here for me, Evan. You're here for them. Don't confuse the two." "I know," he said quietly. "But that doesn't make this any less overwhelming." "It is overwhelming," she agreed. "For me too. But I've had 5 years to learn how to survive it. You haven't." Evan looked down at his hands. "I don't even know how to be around them. They ask me things I don't know how to answer." "Then don't pretend," she said. "They don't need you to be perfect. They just need you to be here when you say you will." He nodded, absorbing that like advice he wasn't sure he deserved. "Can I see them again tomorrow?" She hesitated for a second, then said, "Only if you help fold the laundry this time." He almost laughed. "Deal." Later that day, as he left the house, Lucas ran after him barefoot with Bear in one hand and a small, crumpled drawing in the other. "This is for you," he said, handing it over. Evan took the paper carefully and unfolded it. It was a drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands, with a brown scribble next to them labeled Bear. Underneath, in blocky kid handwriting, was the word us. Evan didn't know what to say. He knelt down slowly and looked Lucas in the eyes. "Thank you. I'll keep it forever." Lucas grinned. "You better." I used my best crayons. Evan stood, folded the drawing like it was gold, and walked back to his car. He didn't turn on the engine right away. He sat there, staring at the picture in his hands, and felt something shift in his chest, not quickly, not all at once, but undeniably. For the first time in his life, he didn't want to be anywhere else. By the end of the week, Evan had visited 4 times. Each time felt a little less foreign, a little more like something he was allowed to step into. The boys began to expect him, not just as the man who brought toys or helped clean up spilled juice, but as someone who was simply there. They called for him when they wanted something off the top shelf or when the blanket fort collapsed. Lucas started climbing into his lap without asking first. Liam began whispering secrets to him, the kind that only made sense to 5-year-olds but still felt like trust. Evan didn't know how to name the feeling it gave him, maybe it was joy, maybe guilt, maybe something that hadn't fully formed yet, but he welcomed it. Olivia remained cautious. She didn't let her guard down easily, and Evan understood that. He had earned her distance. Still, she was fair. She didn't shut him out. In the quiet moments between the chaos of the kids and the routines of daily life, they sometimes found themselves standing near each other for just a second too long, exchanging looks that felt full of history and hesitation. Evan didn't push. He knew this wasn't about reclaiming the past. This was about building something new, even if it started from broken pieces. One afternoon, Olivia was folding laundry on the living room floor while Evan helped the boys assemble a complicated pirate ship made of plastic and too many instructions. Liam lost a piece and began to cry in frustration, but Evan sat beside him and said, "It's okay. We'll find it. Or we'll make a new one." Liam didn't argue. He just leaned against Evan's side quietly until Lucas returned triumphantly with the missing piece. Olivia watched all of it silently, then returned to her folding, her eyes softer than usual. That night, after the boys had gone to bed, Olivia offered him tea. It was the first time she'd done so, and he didn't miss the gesture. They sat in the kitchen, the lights low, voices quiet so as not to wake the kids. Evan sipped the tea and looked around the space, small, a little cluttered, but warm. He realized how empty his own penthouse felt in comparison. "You're good with them," she said eventually, not looking at him. "I'm trying," he answered. "I think I'm still scared I'll mess it up." "You will," she said plainly. "But they'll forgive you if you show up the next day anyway." He nodded, letting the truth of that settle inside him. "Why didn't you ever try to contact me?" "I wanted to," she admitted. "So many times. But you were in every headline, every article. I watched you fly around the world, close deals, win awards. I didn't want to be the person who dragged you into something you didn't choose." "But I would've," he said softly, not even sure if it was the truth or something he desperately wanted to believe. She looked at him now. "Would you? Back then? You didn't even stop me when I left." He had no defense. He had been selfish, so obsessed with control and achievement that he didn't even notice when someone like Olivia slipped out of his life. "I wasn't ready," he said. "But I am now." Her eyes didn't soften, but she nodded slightly. "They need stability. If you want to be here, be here. But don't make them fall in love with you only to walk away." "I won't," he said, meaning it more than he had ever meant anything in his life. There was another pause between them, but it was no longer heavy. It was thoughtful, even a little hopeful. They finished their tea in silence, and when he left that night, she walked him to the door. As he stepped outside, she said, "Same time tomorrow?" He turned, met her gaze, and replied, "Earlier, if you'll let me." That night, as he drove home, Evan didn't turn on the radio. He didn't check his phone. He didn't return the 3 emails his assistant had sent marked urgent. Instead, he rolled down the window and let the night air rush in, realizing for the first time that slowing down didn't mean losing control. Sometimes, it meant finally choosing the right things. Evan started arriving earlier each morning. At first, it was just to help Olivia with breakfast or the morning rush of getting the boys dressed and ready, but soon it became more than that. He began picking up little things on the way over, juice boxes they liked, band-aids with cartoon characters, socks that matched because Olivia always seemed to be looking for a missing pair. He noticed everything now, not just what was said but what was left unsaid, the tiredness in her eyes, the moments when the boys fought and she didn't have the energy to step in, the way she pressed a hand to her forehead when no one was looking. Evan started filling those spaces. Not all at once, and not perfectly, but with genuine effort. He would read to the boys while Olivia showered or cleaned the kitchen while they watched cartoons. Sometimes he didn't do anything at all except sit quietly and let the house breathe around him, no meetings, no calls, just presence. But everything started to shift when Olivia got sick. It was subtle at first. A headache she brushed off, a lingering cough, a few missed meals. Evan noticed, but she waved him off with a tired smile and told him she just needed sleep. A few days later, she collapsed in the hallway while putting away laundry. Evan caught her before she hit the floor, his heart racing as he laid her down and called her name. The boys ran in, confused and scared, and he told them everything was okay even though his hands were shaking. He called an ambulance. Olivia came to before they arrived, but she was pale and weak and too quiet. She tried to argue with the paramedics, tried to tell them she didn't need to go, but Evan stepped in and made the decision she couldn't. He held her hand the entire ride to the hospital, even when she squeezed it a little too tightly. The diagnosis wasn't life-threatening, but it was serious, an untreated infection, worsened by exhaustion, stress, and not enough self-care. The doctor looked at Evan as if he was the husband and explained everything in a tone reserved for family. Evan didn't correct him. He listened, asked questions, and signed papers when Olivia was too tired to hold a pen. She was admitted for a short stay. Rachel, the neighbor, agreed to watch the boys while Evan stayed at the hospital. He didn't leave her side. He pulled a chair next to her bed and sat with his elbows on his knees, staring at the machines that beeped and the 4-bag that dripped slowly. Olivia slept, her face soft and vulnerable in a way he had never seen. He couldn't stop thinking about how close he had come to losing this, the life he had only just started to touch. When she woke up, her eyes found his instantly. "You stayed," she murmured, voice dry and raspy. He nodded. "Of course I did." "You didn't have to," she said. "I know," he replied. "But I wanted to." She closed her eyes again, and her fingers searched for his. He let her take his hand, and they stayed like that, silent but understood. That night, after she fell asleep again, Evan walked out into the hospital corridor. He leaned against the wall, pulled out his phone, and stared at it. Dozens of missed calls. Meetings rescheduled. A stockholder meeting he was supposed to lead. All of it had gone on without him, and for the first time, he didn't feel panic. He felt clarity. He typed a single message to his assistant: "Pause everything. Family comes first." Then he turned the phone off. Back at Olivia's bedside, he unfolded a blanket and sat back down, this time with a steadier heart. He realized he wasn't afraid of this life anymore. He was afraid of not choosing it. He was afraid of letting it slip away while he chased things that would never hold his hand at 3 a.m. Olivia stirred in her sleep and whispered something he couldn't quite make out. He leaned in, brushing her hair from her forehead, and whispered back, "I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time, he meant it with every piece of who he was. Olivia stayed in the hospital for 4 days. During that time, Evan stepped into a version of himself he never knew existed. He woke the boys up each morning, made them cereal, tried and failed to comb their hair evenly, and let them wear mismatched socks when they insisted it was part of their style. He walked them to preschool, held their hands as they crossed the street, and tried to hide how nervous he was about doing it all wrong. But the boys didn't seem to notice. Lucas told him stories the entire way, about a magic lizard with flying powers, while Liam quietly picked flowers and handed them to Evan one by one. At the end of every day, Evan sat in the hospital next to Olivia's bed, updating her on everything, what the boys ate, what they argued about, the exact shape of the cloud Liam said looked like a dinosaur. She smiled, weak but warm, and listened like it was the most important briefing she'd ever received. The nurses began to talk. One of them, a young woman with kind eyes, whispered to Evan one evening, "You're doing better than most dads who've been doing this for years." He didn't know how to respond to that, because he still felt like he was learning how to breathe in this new life. He hadn't signed a single contract, hadn't checked the market in days, and he didn't miss any of it. Instead, he found himself looking at the clock every few hours, counting down the minutes until he could be back at her side, or back with the boys building pillow forts and burning grilled cheese. On the last night before Olivia was discharged, she turned toward him in the dark room. Her voice was stronger now, but quiet. "You didn't have to step in like this." "I know," Evan said, shifting in the chair. "But I wanted to." "I kept them from you," she whispered, eyes on the ceiling. "I thought I was doing the right thing. Maybe I wasn't." Evan leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "You were. Back then, I wasn't ready. I would have ruined everything. But now I'm here. And I want to be their dad. Not just the guy who shows up when it's convenient. I want to be in their lives. All the way." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw that mix of fear and hope in her eyes. "That means letting them love you. Letting them expect things from you. You know that, right?" "I do," he said. "And I want that more than I've ever wanted anything." She didn't say anything after that. She just reached for his hand again and held it, her grip stronger than the first time. When he left the room that night, he passed a small window at the end of the hallway. He stopped, stared out at the streetlights, and for a long time, he didn't think about work or power or success. He thought about how much he had missed, and how much more he was finally ready to fight for. The next morning, he brought her home. The boys had made a giant welcome sign that was half crayons, half glitter, and completely crooked. They threw their arms around her as if she'd been gone a year, not 4 days. Evan watched them, his heart full and aching at once. He helped her to the couch, fluffed the pillows, brought her tea. She didn't resist this time. She let him help. That afternoon, while the boys napped in a tangle of limbs and stuffed animals, Evan sat with Olivia in the kitchen. She looked tired but peaceful, the sunlight warming her face through the window. "They love you already," she said softly. "They're just too young to know how rare that is." "I don't take it for granted," he said. "I don't take any of this for granted." She smiled at him, and for the first time, it didn't feel guarded. "So what now?" He exhaled slowly. "Now I make sure I never give them a reason to question that I'm staying." And he meant it. Every word. Every breath. Because for once, Evan Harper wasn't chasing something more. He had already found it. He just needed to hold on. The following weeks moved in quiet, steady waves, no longer defined by chaos or crisis but by the kind of normalcy Evan had never experienced before. He started staying for dinner more often, sometimes helping Olivia cook, sometimes sitting with the boys while they waited for food, teaching them how to count using forks and napkins or helping Liam sound out new words. He wasn't perfect. He still burned toast, still occasionally said the wrong thing or forgot to pack snacks, but each day he stayed, each morning he showed up again, something inside the boys seemed to settle. They laughed louder, clung to his leg a little longer when he tried to leave, began to look for him first when something exciting or scary happened. The house started to absorb his presence as if it had always made space for him. One evening after dinner, while Lucas and Liam were building towers out of cereal boxes and giggling over whether Daddy Evan could build one taller, Olivia called him into the kitchen. She had her phone in her hand, her expression unreadable. She handed it to him without a word. On the screen was a headline, his name, his company, and a photograph of him holding Liam outside the preschool. The article speculated about his disappearance from the corporate spotlight, about the identity of the children, and whether the shift in his priorities meant instability within the Harper Group. He read the first few lines and stopped. His jaw tightened, but not in anger. He handed the phone back to her and leaned against the counter. "Are you going to lose everything because of this?" she asked, carefully, like she already knew the answer but needed him to say it out loud. "Maybe," he said. "Some of it, probably. The board's been circling. Investors don't like surprises. My absence isn't convenient for them. And you're okay with that?" "I didn't used to be. But now?" He looked through the doorway where the boys were laughing, climbing into a pillow fort that had half collapsed. "Now I think I finally understand what it means to be rich. It's not in numbers or control. It's in showing up, being needed, being loved without earning it. I never had that before. I don't care if they take my title. I've already traded it for something better." Olivia stared at him, the weight of his words resting between them. For so long, she had held the burden of raising their children, of keeping them safe and loved without help. Now, for the first time, she believed she might not have to do it alone anymore. Later that night, after the boys had fallen asleep, Olivia and Evan sat on the couch with a blanket over their legs and the sound of the city humming faintly outside the window. There was no need to fill the silence. But she broke it anyway. "I spent so long convincing myself I didn't need anyone. That letting someone back in would only cost me more than I had left to give." "I know," he said. "I did the same thing with my own life. Only my version was built out of contracts and corner offices." She turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "And now? Now I want the mess. The noise. The mornings with syrup on the floor and toy dinosaurs in the sink. I want all of it. I want them. And I want you, if you'll let me." Her expression didn't shift dramatically. There was no sudden tear, no cinematic gasp. Just a long breath. Then she leaned in, placed her hand over his, and rested her head on his shoulder. "I'm not promising easy," she said. "I'm not asking for easy," he replied. "I'm asking for real." And that night, with the streetlight casting soft shadows through the blinds and the weight of two small bodies asleep down the hall, something between them quietly changed. It wasn't a beginning. It wasn't a return. It was something new. Something stronger. Something earned. Fall settled in slowly, painting the trees in warm shades of amber and rust, and the world around them seemed to quiet just enough for Evan to realize how far he had come. The boys had begun kindergarten, their backpacks slightly too big for their shoulders, their laughter echoing down sidewalks as they raced to school every morning with Evan walking behind them, holding their lunchboxes and trying to keep up. Olivia returned to work part-time, taking on small design projects from home, her spark returning more and more each day. The chaos in their home never disappeared, it was loud and messy and alive, but for Evan, it had become the only kind of success that mattered. He didn't return to the Harper Group. When the board tried to lure him back with offers and restructured contracts, he declined. There was no bitterness in his refusal, only clarity. The company had been his identity for so long that walking away should have felt like failure. But it didn't. It felt like freedom. He redirected his energy into smaller projects, local startups, nonprofits, things that allowed him to stay close to home. It wasn't the empire he once chased, but it was something he built with purpose. Something he could leave behind with pride. One afternoon, he stood in the kitchen helping the boys decorate cookies shaped like pumpkins, their hands covered in frosting and sugar, their laughter loud and uninterrupted. Liam insisted that Bear needed a cookie too, placing a small one in front of the old plush toy, still patched but well loved. Lucas explained that the orange sprinkles were magic, and if Daddy ate them, he would never be tired again. Evan pretended to be amazed, exaggerating every bite until both boys collapsed into giggles. Olivia watched from the doorway, arms crossed, a smile tugging at her lips, and in her eyes was something unspoken, recognition, peace, maybe even love. That evening, after the boys had gone to bed and the kitchen was clean again, Evan handed Olivia a small box. She looked at him, eyebrows raised. "What's this?" she asked, but there was a softness in her voice. He shrugged, trying to keep it casual. "Something small." She opened it slowly, and inside was a key. Not shiny and new, but worn slightly at the edges. "It's to the house 2 blocks from here," he said. "I bought it last week. Not to take you away from this place, but to grow into something bigger. Something that's ours. If you want it." Olivia stared at the key for a long moment, then looked up at him. "You really aren't going anywhere, are you?" He stepped closer. "Not unless you kick me out." She smiled, the kind of smile that started in her eyes and settled into her chest. "Then I guess we better start packing." Months passed, then a year. The house became a home. The boys flourished, their rooms painted in their favorite colors, filled with books and stuffed animals and small, chaotic dreams. Evan found peace in the quiet mornings, the smell of pancakes, the way Olivia reached for his hand when no one else was looking. He wasn't the same man who once rushed through life, always chasing the next deal. He was slower now, more deliberate, and far more present. One night, as they sat in the backyard under a sky full of stars, the boys asleep upstairs and the world soft around them, Olivia leaned her head against his shoulder. He looked at her, the woman who had once walked away to protect her children, and whispered, "You saved me, you know." She didn't answer right away. Then she whispered back, "No. You showed up. You saved yourself." He held her hand tighter and closed his eyes, the cool breeze brushing against his skin. He finally understood what it meant to be full, not of success or status, but of meaning, of family, of quiet moments that made a life. And in that stillness, Evan knew he had everything he'd ever been searching for. He just hadn't known it looked like this. He built an empire and iced out the world, until one summer afternoon in the park, when 3 little girls struggling with a heavy grocery bag stopped him in his tracks. What he didn't know was that helping them would uncover a secret from his past, and a family he never knew he had. It was the kind of Sunday Nick Bennett typically avoided, bright, loud, and filled with people acting as though the world was lighter than it really was. Summer had settled over the city like a gold-tinged blanket, softening everything it touched. Families filled the park, children ran in bursts of laughter, and the breeze carried the scent of cut grass and melting ice cream. It was beautiful, in the kind of way that made Nick feel even more out of place. He wasn't a man who belonged in scenes like this. He had built his life on structure, control, and silence, on cold coffee, glass offices, and numbers that didn't cry or need to be held. He told himself he liked it that way. He had only driven through the park that afternoon to avoid traffic. His assistant had tried to schedule him a brunch with 2 investors, but he'd cancelled at the last minute, claiming a headache. The truth was, he couldn't stomach the idea of small talk and hollow laughter. He needed air. Time to think. Or maybe just time to feel nothing at all. He was sipping overpriced espresso in a to-go cup when he saw them. 3 little girls, no older than 6, walking slowly along the pathway near the playground. They were carrying a large brown paper bag between them, heavy, awkward, clearly too much for their tiny arms. Each of them clutched a corner of the bottom, shuffling forward in an uncoordinated line, their brows furrowed in quiet determination. No adults in sight. No stroller. No cart. Just the 3 of them and a bag that looked like it might rip at any second. Nick's car slowed instinctively. He didn't know why. He told himself he was just curious, just observing. But something inside him whispered, "Stop." He rolled down the window and called out, "Do you need help?" The girls froze, wide-eyed but not afraid. One of them, slightly taller than the others, stepped forward with a shy nod. "Yes, please. Our mom is sick, and we're bringing her groceries. But it's really heavy." Her voice was calm and clear. Not rehearsed. Not begging. Just honest. Nick got out of the car, crossed the sidewalk, and bent down to take the bag from them. As he straightened up, he finally looked at them properly, and everything in his chest stopped. 3 faces stared up at him. 3 blonde heads. 3 pairs of bright, unmistakably blue eyes. It was like looking at old photos of himself, duplicated and scattered through time. Same shape of chin. Same crease between the brows. Same deep, icy gaze that had never softened, not even in childhood. He couldn't speak. The girls didn't seem to notice his reaction. They just turned and began walking again, as if it was perfectly normal to be helped by a stranger who looked like he'd just seen a ghost. Nick followed them in a daze, holding the bag with one hand and gripping something much heavier in his chest with the other. His mind raced. He hadn't seen Sarah in 10 years. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But when they reached the door of a modest apartment building and one of the girls knocked gently before calling out, "Mommy, we brought your food." And when the door opened to reveal a pale, exhausted woman with the same dark honey hair he remembered tracing with his fingers, he knew the impossible had just become very, very real. Sarah Brooks blinked at him, frozen in the doorway. "Nick," she said, her voice no more than a breath. "What are you doing here?" He stared at her, the past unraveling in every breath. He glanced down at the girls, then back at her. "Sarah," he said slowly, his voice cracking. "Are they mine?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Sarah didn't answer him right away. She stood frozen in the doorway, her hand still resting lightly on the frame as if bracing herself against something she didn't expect to see, something she hadn't prepared for. Nick could feel the 3 little girls hovering beside him, close enough to hear but not old enough to understand what was unfolding in front of them. The silence between him and Sarah stretched just long enough to become heavy. Finally, without a word, she stepped aside and nodded toward the living room. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. And Nick followed her in. The apartment was small, quiet, and smelled faintly of chamomile and laundry soap. It had the feel of a place held together by effort, not money, clean, but worn at the edges. There were drawings taped to the walls, a few well-loved books stacked on a side table, and 3 little pairs of shoes by the door. He recognized none of it, and yet it all felt deeply personal. The girls kicked off their sneakers and scrambled toward a corner where a collection of plush animals and coloring books waited. They didn't pay him any more attention. To them, he was just the man who helped carry the bag. Sarah gestured toward the couch, and Nick sat down slowly, unsure whether to speak first or wait. She disappeared into the kitchen and came back a moment later with 2 mugs of tea, handing him one without looking at him. She sat across from him, her fingers wrapped around her cup like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "I didn't plan for you to ever find out," she said softly. "Especially not like this." Nick set the mug down. "They're mine." It wasn't a question. It was an admission, a realization that had already sunk deep into his bones. All 3 of them. Sarah looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time. There was no anger in her expression, no bitterness, just exhaustion. "Yes. They are." He leaned back slowly, letting the weight of it hit him again. "Why didn't you tell me?" She hesitated. "Because I knew who you were back then. I knew what you were building. You had your empire, your future, and your rules. I wasn't going to be the one to break that. And I wasn't going to raise my daughters hoping for a man who didn't want to be a father." Nick's chest tightened. You made that decision for me. I did, she said. Because I saw the way you shut down whenever anything got too close. You didn't even say goodbye when I left. I didn't know how, he admitted. And I didn't have the energy to teach you, she replied. So I went. I did what I had to. He looked toward the girls, now sitting on the floor drawing rainbows and trees like they didn't just shift the entire structure of his world. What are their names? Sarah's voice softened. Ellie. May. Grace. He repeated them silently, like he was trying to memorize something sacred. They're everything, she said, barely above a whisper. Everything I have. Everything I fought for. He turned back to her. Do they know about me? She shook her head. They know their dad isn't here. They know they were born out of love, but they've never asked for more than what I could give. Nick felt a knot form in his throat. He had no blueprint for this moment. No business analogy could prepare him for the fact that he had daughters, 3 of them, and that they'd lived their entire lives just a few miles away while he moved through boardrooms and stock markets, never knowing he had missed the most important meetings of all. I want to be part of their lives, he said slowly. I don't know how. But I want to try. Sarah didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just studied him, her fingers still tight around the mug. It won't be easy. And it can't be about guilt. It's not guilt, he said. It's regret. And maybe something else I haven't figured out yet. There was a long pause. You can stay for dinner, she said quietly. If you want. Nothing fancy. Just spaghetti. Nick nodded. I'd like that. And just like that, something shifted, not loudly, not all at once, but in the way a door creaks open after being shut for too many years. He watched as Ellie offered him a crayon. He took it. It broke in his fingers. She giggled. And he laughed, for the first time in a long time, not because he had to, but because something inside him started to thaw. Nick returned the next evening. He didn't call ahead, didn't overthink what he was wearing, and didn't bring flowers or gifts, only a bag of groceries, chosen carefully after pacing the aisles for over an hour, unsure of what 6-year-old girls like to eat. He bought strawberries, alphabet pasta, and chocolate milk, second-guessing everything along the way. When Sarah opened the door, she looked at the bag and then at him, raising one eyebrow as if to say, you didn't have to. But she stepped aside without a word, and that was enough. The girls were in the living room again, sprawled out on the floor with crayons and construction paper. They looked up when he entered, and Ellie was the first to smile. It was small, uncertain, but it reached her eyes, and he felt something catch in his chest. He crouched down, set the bag on the kitchen counter, and said, I brought snacks. I didn't know what to get, so I got everything. May walked up and took a look. Do you have cheese crackers? No, he said slowly. But I can go back and get some. She considered this like a business proposition and then nodded. Next time. Grace, the quietest of the 3, stayed behind the others, observing him like she was still unsure if he was real. Nick gave her space, but every so often, he caught her watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. Dinner was simple. Sarah cooked, and he offered to help, but she waved him off with a look that said, I've been doing this alone for 6 years. Just sit. So he did. He sat at the small kitchen table and listened to the chaos of 3 small girls arguing over napkin colors and where to sit. He was a stranger in their world, but one they had decided, for now, not to reject. During dinner, he listened more than he spoke. The girls talked about their teacher, a bug they found on the window, and a game they invented where May was always the boss and Ellie always rebelled. Grace didn't speak at all, but she sat beside him and quietly nudged her cup toward him when she needed more milk. He poured it carefully, hands steady, and felt a strange pride when she whispered, "Thank you." After dinner, Sarah walked him out. The sky was turning violet, and the street was quiet except for the sound of cicadas in the trees. He paused before getting into his car, unsure if he should speak first. She did. "They like you," she said simply. He looked at her, searching her face for sarcasm. There was none. "They don't know what you are to them yet," she added. "But they're curious. That's a start." He nodded slowly. "I don't want to push too fast." "You don't have to," she said. "Just keep showing up." He wanted to ask her how she'd managed all this on her own. How she'd stayed strong when everything must have felt like a weight she had no help carrying. But he didn't want to dig where he hadn't been invited. So he just said, "Thank you for letting me be here." Sarah's expression softened. "This isn't for me. It's for them. But, it's good to see you trying." That night, when he got home to his glass-walled condo in the sky, everything felt different. The space, once a symbol of everything he thought he wanted, suddenly felt too quiet, too polished, too empty. He walked past his untouched kitchen, past the sterile living room, and sat down in the one chair that faced the window. He thought about the way May had negotiated for crackers, the way Ellie had asked if he could draw a puppy, and the way Grace had leaned against his side for just a moment when she got tired. He'd missed 6 years. He couldn't get those back. But maybe, just maybe, if he kept showing up, he could be there for what came next. And for the first time in his life, that felt more important than anything money had ever bought him. Nick started coming over every other day, and sometimes more than that when Sarah let him. He never asked to stay long, never demanded space or answers, he just showed up, quietly, with small things. Coloring books, a box of crackers, a hand-sewn teddy bear he had no idea how to shop for but bought anyway because he thought Grace might like it. He brought picture books and puzzles and eventually, small Lego sets that ended up all over the floor but somehow helped him build more than structures. They helped him build something steady between himself and 3 little strangers he was slowly learning to love. The girls adapted to his presence in different ways. Ellie, the boldest, began treating him like a challenge, throwing questions at him every chance she got. "What's your favorite color? Have you ever ridden a horse? Why don't you have a dog?" May warmed to him when he proved he could make grilled cheese better than hers, though she never admitted it directly. Grace stayed quiet, watchful, but eventually started bringing him little scraps of paper drawings without saying a word. He kept every single one. Sarah didn't say much during these visits. Sometimes she sat at the table with her laptop open, watching with a distant calm that hid something more vulnerable underneath. Other times she stayed in her room to rest. Her health was fragile, and Nick noticed more often now, how she winced slightly when she moved, how she covered her cough, how the color in her cheeks faded on bad days. He offered help constantly. She refused just as often. The only thing she accepted without protest was his presence. One afternoon, while the girls were napping and Sarah was folding laundry, Nick asked the question that had been pressing on him for days. "Why didn't you tell me you were sick?" She didn't look up from the towel in her hands. "Because it wasn't your problem." "It is now," he said quietly. She stopped folding, placed the towel on the table, and finally looked at him. "Nick, you don't have to make up for everything at once." "I'm not trying to," he said. "I'm just trying not to disappear again." Her face softened, but the exhaustion behind her eyes was still there. "I'm tired of fighting for everything. For help, for support, for someone just to stay. You've been kind, and the girls like you, but if this is about guilt, I can't carry that too." He shook his head. "It's not guilt anymore. It's something else. I don't know what to call it yet, but it's real. And I want to be here, not just for them, but for you too." For a long time, she didn't say anything. Then she picked up the towel again. "You're late to everything, you know that?" He smiled faintly. "Yeah. But I'm trying not to be too late." The next few days passed in a rhythm that was new to him. He took calls from her kitchen, with Grace drawing on the corner of his notes. He answered investor emails between puzzles and snack time. His team didn't understand it. His assistants left voicemails with questions he used to answer within minutes. But he didn't rush to respond anymore. The urgency he once lived with had changed shape. Then one night, Sarah collapsed. He had just arrived, carrying dinner and a new set of books, when he found her slumped against the wall of the hallway, trying to stand but unable to. He dropped everything and rushed to her side. She was conscious, pale, trembling, her voice barely audible. "I just got dizzy," she whispered. Nick lifted her gently, carried her to the couch, and yelled for Rachel, the neighbor who often checked in. Within 10 minutes they were on the phone with an ambulance. He stayed by her side the whole time, gripping her hand like it was the only thing keeping her here. At the hospital, while the doctors ran tests and the girls stayed with Rachel, Nick sat in the hallway with his head in his hands. All the power, all the money, all the control, none of it meant anything in that sterile corridor with the scent of antiseptic and fear in the air. When the doctor finally approached and told him that Sarah's immune system was deteriorating faster than expected, that her condition could be managed but only with sustained treatment, rest, and support, he didn't hesitate. "Do whatever she needs. I'll cover it. All of it." Later that night, when she woke in her hospital bed, her voice was raspy but steady. "You didn't have to stay." "Yes," he said. "I did." She looked at him for a long time, the air between them full of everything that had never been said. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know," he said. "Me too." He reached for her hand again. This time, she didn't pull away. Sarah stayed in the hospital for 4 more days. The doctors insisted on keeping her under observation, adjusting her medication, and monitoring her immune response. Nick never left. He turned her hospital room into a quiet command center, working from a folding chair with his laptop balanced on his knees, headphones in one ear, eyes constantly flicking toward her monitors. He didn't talk much, and neither did she, but there was something unspoken growing between them, a fragile understanding built not on words, but on presence. The kind of connection that comes when someone stays long after it would have been easier to leave. Rachel brought the girls to visit every afternoon. They didn't understand the full extent of what was happening, but they knew enough to sense that something was different. Ellie clung to Sarah's hand and asked if the doctors were making her better. May brought her a plastic ring she'd won from a vending machine and told her it had healing powers. Grace just climbed up beside her and stayed there, silent but close, like she always did when she didn't know how to say she was scared. Nick watched all of it and realized that these girls had lived their entire lives navigating fear without a father. And now that he was here, he couldn't pretend to be temporary. When Sarah was finally discharged, Nick drove her and the girls home himself. He helped carry her upstairs, helped tuck her into bed, helped calm the girls when they were too excited to settle down. That night, once they were asleep, he stayed in the living room with Sarah, both of them too tired to talk, sitting in the dim light while the weight of everything hovered between them. She didn't ask him to leave, and he didn't offer to go. At some point she fell asleep with her head tilted toward him, and instead of moving, he watched the soft rise and fall of her breath and let himself feel everything he had spent years avoiding. In the days that followed, things changed. Not in dramatic ways, but in small ones that mattered. Nick moved a few meetings to video calls and started spending more time at Sarah's apartment. He cooked simple meals, helped with school pickups, and sat on the floor helping Grace with her alphabet puzzles while answering texts from his board. His phone buzzed constantly, but the sound felt quieter now. The urgency that used to drive him had been replaced with something calmer, something deeper. He was still learning what it meant to be a father, but every day he learned a little more. He learned that May liked to sing while brushing her teeth, that Ellie always asked 3 questions before falling asleep, and that Grace had a quiet streak of bravery that showed itself in the smallest moments. Sarah, too, began to change. She was still exhausted, still healing, but Nick's presence gave her room to breathe in ways she hadn't experienced in years. She started sleeping more. She started smiling more. And once, while watching him struggle to braid Ellie's hair before school, she laughed out loud, a real laugh, one that caught even her by surprise. It felt like the sound of something breaking open, something buried under years of survival. But not everyone was happy with Nick's new life. Rumors began circulating inside his company. Executives whispered about his priorities shifting, shareholders started asking questions about his long absences, and his father's old advisors reached out with concern. One of them, a longtime partner named Malcolm, called and asked to meet. They met at Nick's office late in the evening. The city glowed outside the windows, but inside the room felt cold. Malcolm was direct. He explained that a clause in Nick's inheritance agreement, the same clause Nick had once laughed off without reading, explicitly stated that any prolonged relationship with individuals deemed detrimental to public image could trigger a review of his control over the company's family shares. It was an old stipulation, buried deep in the legacy left by his father. Malcolm wasn't threatening him. He was warning him. Nick sat in silence for a long moment. Then he leaned back and asked, "You're telling me I could lose everything because I'm helping the mother of my children?" Malcolm didn't flinch. "I'm telling you that the people who wrote these contracts never expected you to choose anything over business. And some of them are watching now, waiting to see what you do." Nick didn't answer. He ended the meeting, walked out into the night, and drove straight to Sarah's. He didn't tell her what Malcolm said. Not yet. She was asleep when he arrived, curled on the couch beneath a blanket the girls had picked out for her. He sat beside her in the quiet and stared at the ceiling, wondering how the life he'd built so carefully had become something he'd now be willing to risk, just to keep what actually mattered. And in that moment, he knew. He'd already made his decision. He just hadn't said it out loud yet. The next morning, Nick stood at the kitchen counter, making pancakes that were slightly too brown on one side and lumpy on the other, but the girls didn't seem to mind. They had started calling him Mr. Nick, which he didn't correct, though every time he heard it, something in him ached a little. He knew what he wanted them to call him, but he wasn't ready to ask, and they weren't ready to offer. That was okay. They had time now. He served the pancakes with strawberries and extra syrup because Ellie insisted it was the only proper way to eat them. May refused syrup entirely, claiming it was too sticky for thinking. Grace just whispered thank you and ate quietly like always. Sarah joined them later, moving slowly but stronger than she had a week ago. She looked at him across the table, her eyes scanning him like she could tell something was off. She didn't say anything, but he knew she knew. After breakfast, the girls ran off to get ready for a walk to the park, and Sarah leaned against the counter with her arms crossed. Her voice was quiet but firm. "What's going on?" Nick wiped his hands on a towel and turned to her. He hadn't planned on telling her like this, but maybe there wasn't a better way. "There's a clause in my father's trust. If I continue seeing you, being with you, publicly, some of the board could push to revoke my voting rights over the family shares." She didn't move. "They'd actually do that?" "Yes," he said. "They're already talking about it." She was quiet for a long time. "And what would that mean for you?" "I'd lose control of everything I built," he said. "The company. My position. The money. Not all of it, but most." She didn't blink. "And what are you going to do?" He looked at her then, truly looked, and realized this was the clearest moment of his life. "I'm not leaving." Sarah swallowed. "Nick, this isn't just about you." "Yes, it is," he said. "It's about the kind of man I've been and the kind of man I want to be. I've already lost years with you, with them. I'm not sacrificing what matters just to keep pretending that legacy means anything if I'm miserable inside it." Sarah stepped forward, her voice shaking. "They will destroy you. And me. And the girls will see it. Then we teach them what it looks like to stand for something, he said. Even if it costs. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. You don't owe us this. I don't, he said. But I want it. I want all of it. And I'm not going to ask permission to love my own family. That night, he made the call. A formal resignation from all voting roles within the Bennett Corporation. He submitted a full legal statement outlining his withdrawal from inheritance structures tied to reputational clauses. His lawyers tried to stall him, warned him about what this would mean long-term. But he didn't flinch. He'd spent half his life chasing a version of success that couldn't hold him when he was broken, couldn't sit at the dinner table or sing off-key lullabies or cry quietly at 3 a.m. He didn't need the old version anymore. 2 days later, the news broke. A quiet leak in the financial press. Nick Bennett steps back from Bennett Corporation amid personal restructuring. The headlines speculated about scandal, divorce, mismanagement. He didn't respond to a single one. Instead, he went to the park with Ellie, May, and Grace and sat beneath the sun while they climbed monkey bars and asked if he could push them on the swings. On the walk home, Ellie looked up at him and said, "Why do people take pictures of you now?" He hesitated, unsure how to explain power and loss to a 6-year-old. But before he could answer, May interrupted. "Because he's famous, duh." Grace slipped her hand into his, and for a moment, nothing else mattered. Not money. Not the board. Not the reputation. Just her tiny fingers wrapped around his, and the feeling of finally being where he was meant to be. That night, Sarah made dinner. Nothing fancy. Just soup and toast. But she let him stand beside her, shoulder to shoulder, stirring the pot while the girls set the table. There was music playing low, laughter echoing down the hallway, and for the first time in years, Nick felt no need to be anywhere else. After the girls had gone to bed, he stepped onto the balcony with Sarah. The night air was warm, stars barely visible above the city lights. He took a deep breath and said, "I walked away from everything." She nodded. "And you walked into something real." He didn't respond with words. He just reached for her hand and stood there, knowing he had chosen the harder path, and the right one. News of Nick's decision continued to ripple through the business world in the days that followed. The headlines were loud, but Nick remained silent. He refused interviews, declined statements, and didn't try to control the narrative. For the first time in his adult life, he let people speculate. And for the first time, he didn't care what they believed. He had spent so many years building a reputation, defending a name, upholding an image that never once reflected who he really was. Now, he was more interested in building something that didn't need headlines to exist, something rooted in presence, in honesty, in small, ordinary moments that didn't require an audience. At home, the changes were quieter but more significant. Sarah's health stabilized under consistent care, her color slowly returning and her energy rebuilding with each day. She had more good days than bad now. She laughed more, ate better, rested longer, and no longer braced herself for collapse. Nick scheduled her appointments, picked up prescriptions, and sat beside her when she felt anxious. He wasn't trying to save her. He was simply showing up, again and again, because she no longer had to face things alone. The girls had stopped calling him Mr. Nick. It happened one evening when Grace, half asleep on the couch, mumbled, "Daddy, can I have more water?" He froze for a second, waiting to see if she'd correct herself. She didn't. She just leaned against his side, eyes fluttering shut again. He got up, brought her water, and sat quietly while she drifted back to sleep. The next day, Ellie used it too, casual, like it had always been his name. May followed a few days later, but not before teasing him that "Daddy" made him sound old. He wore the title like armor. One afternoon, Sarah sat on the back steps with Nick while the girls played with chalk on the sidewalk. The sun warmed her bare arms, and for the first time in years, she didn't look like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. She watched Ellie draw a crooked sun and said, "You know, there was a time when I thought they'd never have anyone but me." Nick didn't respond right away. He was watching Grace carefully line up a row of hearts. Then he said, "I used to think the same thing. About myself." Sarah looked at him. "Are you okay with all this? With what you gave up?" He met her gaze without hesitation. "I didn't give anything up. I traded noise for peace. I traded being seen by strangers for being known by the people who matter. I'll take that every time." She studied him for a moment longer. "I never thought we'd find our way back to anything." "Maybe we didn't," he said. "Maybe we just built something new." That night, he tucked the girls into bed while Sarah watched from the hallway. Ellie asked him to read a chapter from their favorite book, and May demanded he use silly voices, while Grace asked if she could sleep with the drawing she made of all 5 of them. He kissed each of their foreheads, whispered goodnight, and turned off the light. When he came back out, Sarah was still standing there. Her eyes met his, and before he could speak, she stepped forward and kissed him, softly, but without hesitation. It wasn't the kind of kiss that tried to erase the past. It was one that acknowledged it and chose to move forward anyway. "I love you," she said, quietly but clearly. He didn't flinch. "I love you too. More than I know how to say." There were no promises made that night, no declarations of forever, no plans drawn up in certainty. But they sat side by side on the couch, hands intertwined, and understood that whatever came next, they'd face it together. And that, for both of them, was more than enough. Summer turned to fall slowly, like the world itself wasn't in a rush anymore. The leaves began to change, and with them, so did the rhythm of their lives. There were still hard days, mornings when Sarah felt too tired to stand for long, afternoons when the girls argued endlessly, nights when Nick questioned if he was doing enough, but the difference now was that none of them faced those moments alone. They had become a unit, a family not born in the traditional way but formed through choices, rebuilt trust, and the quiet work of showing up every single day. Nick walked the girls to school most mornings. They insisted on holding each of his hands, which left one of them clinging to his back pocket or coat sleeve. They talked the whole way, about clouds, books, questions like whether fish had dreams or why grown-ups always seemed tired. He answered every single one, even when he didn't have a real answer. At pickup, they ran to him like he'd been gone for a year. That feeling never stopped hitting him in the chest. He hadn't known what love like that felt like before. It had been missing all his life, and he never even realized it until they gave it to him. Sarah started volunteering at the girls' school, just an hour here or there at first, then more as her strength returned. The staff adored her. Other mothers began to ask if she was the one who made the painted bookmarks in the library. She started smiling more in public, laughing without catching herself afterward. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. Nick loved seeing that transformation more than any headline he'd ever earned. He watched her from across the schoolyard sometimes, arms crossed, leaning against the gate, laughing at something one of the kids said, and he'd feel this overwhelming sense of rightness settle over him, like this was exactly where they were always meant to end up. On a crisp October afternoon, they all went to the park where it had started. Sarah sat on a blanket with a thermos of tea. The girls ran ahead, chasing each other through a sea of orange leaves, their laughter floating across the air. Nick stood a few steps behind them, watching, taking it all in, remembering the version of himself who had once sat in his car at this very spot, a man with cold hands and an even colder heart. He barely recognized that person now. Ellie tripped and scraped her knee. She didn't cry, but she looked around, confused for a moment. Then she saw him. "Daddy," she called, and he was there before she could say anything else. He knelt down, checked her knee, kissed the bruise even though she rolled her eyes, and carried her back to the blanket. May climbed into his lap like it was her natural seat, and Grace leaned against his shoulder, humming a tune only she seemed to know. Sarah watched them, her eyes full but calm. She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "This is for you," she said, handing it to Nick. He opened it slowly. Inside was a drawing, 5 stick figures, all holding hands beneath a giant tree, surrounded by tiny stars and a crooked sun. At the bottom, written in Grace's careful handwriting, were the words, "Our family." He didn't speak at first. He couldn't. His throat closed with emotion, and he held the paper like it was the most important contract he'd ever signed. In that moment, all the pieces of his life, every deal, every headline, every sleepless night, every step away from the life he thought he wanted, fell away, and only this remained. The girls. Sarah. The choice to love them, to stay, to belong. As the sun dipped behind the trees and the wind picked up just slightly, Sarah leaned against him and whispered, "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" Nick turned to her, kissed her temple, and replied, "We already are." No headlines. No boardrooms. No legacy to protect. Just a family. And finally, that was everything.